Calum Draven had ruled his kingdom for 6 years, and in all that time, he had learned one thing above all others. Peace was not free. It always cost something, a resource, a promise, a piece of yourself you handed over and never got back. He had paid in blood during the border wars of his 3rd year on the throne. He had paid in pride during the Eastern famine, when he had needed to ask his rivals for grain. He had paid in silence, in compromises, in the particular exhaustion of being the strongest person in every room, while still not being strong enough to stop everything bad from happening. The price of this peace was Isolde. She arrived at the palace on a gray morning in early winter, her convoy moving through the gates of Draven City with the quiet dignity of someone who understood exactly what she was walking into. Princess Isolde of the Ashen Pack, the 4th daughter of Alpha Gregor, whose eastern territory had been a source of conflict for 3 generations before this agreement finally put an end to it. Calum stood at the top of the great steps and watched her descend from her carriage. She was graceful, she was composed. She looked at him with dark, steady eyes that gave nothing away, and he thought, she is doing this the same way I am. She is paying a price she chose. He respected her immediately. He also felt, standing there in the cold morning air, a strange and sourceless ache behind his ribs. Not grief, not reluctance, something older than either of those things. A leaning, a pull toward something he could not see or name. He dismissed it. There was too much work to do. The wedding was held a month later. It was attended by every significant alpha on the continent, most of their advisors, and roughly 600 wolves who all had opinions about what this alliance meant for the balance of power. Calum wore the formal armor of the Draven line, which was heavy and uncomfortable, and entirely required. Isolde wore silver, and she wore it like she had been born to it, which she had been, in the way that daughters of powerful men are shaped into vessels of usefulness before they are old enough to choose anything else. She knew that. He knew that she knew that. It sat between them at the wedding banquet like a third guest, politely ignored by everyone. The court learned quickly that Isolde was not a woman who could be handled. She was intelligent, precise, and she had opinions that she expressed clearly and without apology. She was not warm toward Calum, but she was not cold either. She was honest, she told him, during their 3rd week of marriage, in the manner of someone getting an unpleasant thing out of the way early, that she had no expectation of love, that she hoped for respect, and that she intended to spend her time in this court doing something useful, or she would lose her mind entirely. He told her to pick a cause and pursue it, and he would make sure she had the resources for it. She chose education reform in the outer territories. She was very good at it. They built something that was not love, and was not nothing. A structure. A working agreement between 2 people who were too honest to pretend it was more, and too decent to pretend it was less. But at 3 in the morning, sometimes, Calum woke with the smell of pine smoke and rain in the back of his throat, belonging to no memory he could find. He did not know then that the memory belonged to a corridor. A specific corridor in the east wing of the palace, on a rainy evening 5 years before the wedding, during a period of tense diplomatic talks over border territory. He had been walking back from a late council session, documents in hand, half his mind already on the morning meeting. She had been walking toward him from the other direction, carrying a territorial map that was too large for one person to hold properly, and a leather satchel that was clearly overloaded and listing dangerously to one side. They had met in the middle of the corridor when the satchel strap snapped. Papers went everywhere. The map attempted to take flight. Calum caught it before it could roll into a complete disaster, and when he looked up from saving the map, he found her already crouching on the floor, gathering documents with the focused efficiency of someone who did not have time to be embarrassed about things. She looked up at him. He looked at her. Something happened that neither of them had a word for yet. A shift. A recognition so sudden and so large that it had nowhere to go, no frame to fit it into. Her name was Lyra Voss. She was a diplomatic attaché from a fractured border pack, brilliant and direct, and entirely without social performance. He had passed her in hallways before. He had read her name in meeting summaries, but this was the first time they had been in the same room at the same time, with no one else present, and the difference was enormous. They argued, that evening, about the territorial map, about which border markers were accurate, and which had been placed strategically to misrepresent the actual geography. She was right about 2 of the 3 points she made. He told her so. She told him the third one was more complicated than he was giving it credit for. He stayed in that corridor for 2 hours. He thought about her for 2 weeks. Over the following months, it built slowly, and then all at once, the way weather changes, gradually on the horizon, then suddenly present and unavoidable. They spoke whenever their paths crossed, which was often, and each conversation left him thinking more clearly and feeling more unsettled in a way that had nothing to do with conflict. The bond had not declared itself yet. It was still a leaning, a compass needle with no name on it. And then she was gone. No notice, no letter, no explanation left behind for anyone. The room she had occupied was cleared out with the kind of thoroughness that meant it was intentional. Her name was removed from the diplomatic registry because her pack had quietly withdrawn her credentials. No one seemed to know why. No one seemed to know where she had gone. Calum told himself he did not know why the absence felt like something taken when he had no claim on her, when nothing had been spoken between them, when the thing between them had no name yet. He told himself that for 5 years. He told himself that the morning he signed the marriage treaty with Alpha Gregor. He told himself that standing at the altar in the heavy formal armor of his house, with Isolde beside him in silver, and the ache behind his ribs so familiar by then that he had almost stopped noticing it. Almost. The Veil were not what Calum's court called them. His court called them the enemy, which was a word that had been passed down through 3 generations of political convenience, until it had hardened into something that felt like fact. The truth was considerably less dramatic. The Veil were a large, old pack with territory along the continent's northern edge, separated from the rest of the political structure by a border dispute that had begun over a resource claim that no longer even existed. The mines the original conflict had been about had been empty for 30 years. Nobody had gotten around to revising the narrative. Lyra Voss had figured all of this out in 6 weeks. She had arrived in Veil territory on foot, in winter, with very little to her name and the particular focused calm of someone who had made an enormous decision and was going to live inside it rather than second-guess it. The Veil Council had been skeptical. They received outsiders with the wariness of people who had learned, repeatedly, that outsiders brought problems. She had not brought problems. She had brought the territorial maps, the real ones, with the accurate border markers. And then she had sat down with the Veil's senior strategists and spent 3 months going through the history of their exclusion from continental diplomacy, point by point, identifying exactly where the arguments against them were built on outdated information and exactly where they had leverage they had not been using. She was extraordinarily good at this, at finding the places where the story did not match the facts and building a new story from what was actually there. She stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, though that was also true in its way. She stayed because the work mattered, and because the Veil were worth the work, and because she had come to understand, slowly, that the thing she had run from was not Calum. It was what she feared she would become inside the bond. Smaller, instrumental. Someone whose value was what she meant to a powerful man, rather than what she could build on her own terms. She had watched it happen to women around her entire life, and the fear of it had moved faster than the bond had, and she had run before she could think it through properly. 5 years of building something entirely her own had given her enough ground to stand on that she could finally look at the fear without flinching. It did not make going back simple. It made it possible. The Veil delegation rode into Draven City on a clear morning in late spring, 5,000 wolves moving through the capital gates with the quiet discipline of people who understood they were being watched and had decided to let themselves be watched without apology. Lyra rode at the front. She had not planned to be dramatic about it. She had planned to be professional, efficient, and focused entirely on the treaty that had taken her 8 months to structure into something both sides could actually agree to. She had prepared for 100 scenarios involving Calum, rehearsed responses to anger and coldness and formal distance. She had not prepared for the moment she rode through the gates and felt the bond open in her chest like a door thrown wide in a storm. She controlled her face. She kept her seat. She rode at the same steady pace through the length of the courtyard, while every instinct she had pointed in exactly one direction. She found him at the top of the steps. He had found her first. The look on his face was the look of a man who had spent 5 years calling something by the wrong name and had just learned the right one. She had seen complicated things on his face in corridors and meeting rooms, and arguments over maps, but she had never seen this. This was not composed. This was not controlled. This was a man standing very still because he did not trust himself to move. Around them, the formal proceedings continued. Greetings were exchanged. The Peace Council assembled. Isolde stood 2 feet to Calem's left, and Lyra had a second to take in her face, careful, precise, already processing, before the protocol of the moment pulled everyone's attention back to the official business. That night, in the first session of negotiations, Lyra put the treaty framework on the table and walked both councils through it. She was composed and thorough and entirely in control of the room. She did not look at Calem any more than the structure of the meeting required. He did not look at her any more than necessary either. Both of them were working very hard at this. They were alone for the first time on the 3rd day, in a corridor, which Lyra found almost unbearably appropriate. She had stepped out of a recess between sessions. He had come from the opposite direction. The corridor was empty. They both stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, simply, "You came back." And she said, "I came back for them," meaning the veil, meaning the treaty, meaning the work. And then, because she had promised herself she would not hide behind the work, "And I came back because I was done being afraid of this." He was quiet for long enough that she thought she had misjudged something important. Then he said, "I needed you to explain it. I needed to understand why you left." So she explained it, standing in the corridor, between a peace negotiation and whatever was coming next. She told him what the fear had been, what she had seen happen to women in positions like hers, what she had not trusted about herself, and about him, and about what the bond would make of them. He listened the way he listened in council sessions, completely present, processing, not interrupting. When she finished, he said, "I wish you had trusted me enough to let me be part of the decision." She said, "I know. I wish I had too." Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he said, "Are you done running?" She looked at him. The bond sat between them like a steady fire, patient and enormous, and entirely certain of itself even when they were not. "I am," she said, "if you still want me here." He said, quietly, "I have wanted you here for 5 years." The treaty was signed 6 weeks later. It was a significant moment in the history of the continent, the first time the veil had been formally recognized as part of the diplomatic structure in 40 years. The terms were fair on both sides, which was rarer than it should have been, and spoke to the quality of the work that had gone into building them. Isolde had begun her annulment proceedings before the treaty was signed. She did it without drama and without bitterness, with the same precise intelligence she brought to the education reform work that had come to define her years in the court. She had a conversation with Calem that was honest and without performance, and she had a conversation with Lyra that surprised both of them, direct, respectful, and entirely forward-looking. She went home to the Ashen Territory 3 months later. Within a year, she had positioned herself as her father's successor, which was the thing she had always been suited for and never offered. She was, by all accounts, very good at it. What followed between Calem and Lyra was not simple, because nothing about their lives was simple. She was still the Veil's leading strategist. He was still a king. Between them, they were responsible for the kind of peace that needed constant tending, the kind built out of trust rather than obligation, which was both sturdier and more demanding than anything built by treaty alone. They built it anyway. The bond was not a solution. It was a fact, the way the mountains at the edge of the Northern Territory were a fact, large and present, and requiring everyone to navigate around them. Within it, they argued, and disagreed, and worked through things that were not easy, and built a life that was theirs, in the way that only things you choose entirely can be yours. The wolves who told the story later called it a love story, because that was the shape that fit most easily into a sentence. Lyra thought the truer shape was this: 2 people who had both, separately, built something worth bringing to a table, and had finally, After 5 years and one war and one peace and one corridor, and the particular patience of bonds that do not give up, sat down at the same one.